Hey guys, as a professional detailer, the number one thing that we try to avoid when polishing paint is, of course, burning through someone's paint. But what if we actually did it on purpose? Meaning, what if we burned through the paint, but we studied how that paint came off the car and actually learned how to be a better polisher? We're gonna do that today on this 2004 Toyota Corolla. This thing was crushed, it was hit, and now it's gonna be going to the junker. I said, hey, bring it over to the studio and let's put up a timer and figure out, hey, how do we polish it correctly? And then how do we polish it so that we burn through the paint? And then we can see the time difference. We'll do that on metal and we'll do that on plastic, and we'll change up some of the tools. So you can sort of get an idea of like, hey, I know that when it gets to this temperature, we're probably gonna be burning through the paint. We're gonna measure the paint. So we're gonna get a little scientific here, but I think it's gonna be great to learn where that limit is. We're gonna do that today on this episode of Try and Protect. That's smoke. Much like any of the best race car drivers that are out there, the way that they find the limit is to unfortunately crash the car. They go, oh, okay, that's where the limit is. We're gonna do the same kind of concept today, but we're gonna burn through the paint to figure out where that limit is during the polishing process. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna separate this into 3 separate sections. The first one up here, we're gonna compound and polish, just like you normally would do, leave as much clear coat as possible and return the car to the customer, that kind of concept. The second one, what we're gonna do is take the compounding part out of phase 1 and just burn all the way through the paint, and we're gonna time it on the iPad to see how long it takes. The third section, we're gonna use the polishing that we did up here and just go all the way through the paint. My intuition is telling me it's gonna take a lot longer. We may even burn through the pads before we actually get through the paint. But before we do any of that, the goal is to measure the paint. Now this is the paint depth gauge, and you can see it's 6 mils right here. That means the very top of the clear coat all the way down to the metal, all of that measures 6 mils. Our goal today is to polish, measure the time. How long does it take to get all the way through and burn the paint? So today we're gonna find that limit. First, I measured the paint in each of the 3 sections to establish a baseline depth and then wrote the reading in Sharpie on the corresponding spot on the paint. I did this so that you could see the consistency across the paint panel. On average, it was roughly about 6 mils with a deviation of about 0.4 mils plus or minus. The reason I did that is to make sure this whole thing is consistent. Otherwise, it's going to throw off our numbers and our data. So you can see here, 6.8, 6.3, 6.1. It's still within the 6s. Is pretty reasonable. You have a 7.1 here. If it fluctuated from something, let's say this pretend was 4, and then right over here was 12 or 15, we know that there's Bondo somewhere going on here, and it's going to throw off our numbers. All within reason, so we're good to go. For section 1, I'm using the Repost wool coarse cutting pad and blue compound for about 52 seconds. Okay, after the first step, you can see this looks like a piece of glass. It's too bad this thing is just a hot mess and a piece of junk. It will look amazing, but if you go from this side to here, look at that light right there. I'll keep my finger on it. See how tight that circle becomes? That's because the light isn't reflecting anywhere other than into the camera lens. Here, it's going all over the place, right? There's scratches everywhere. So right off the bat, it looks 1,000 times better. It took about, I don't know, 2 minutes to do. And now let's go in and measure. It isn't wildly different. I don't remember the exact numbers, but they were right in here, right? It was high 5s, low 6s, that kind of thing. So we didn't take off 2 mils or 3 mils. You're like, oh my gosh, if this said 2 or 3, so oh geez, that takes a lot of paint off doing it. So that process, really, you can do that multiple times over the life of the vehicle. You just want to be careful and keep the integrity of the clear coat. Now we're going to take that same step. We're going to use the wool cutting pad, go here. Remember these numbers here, high 5s, low 6s, and we're just gonna keep grinding down and see how long it takes to go through the paint. Okay, as you can see right here, there is a ridge, meaning the design of the hood. And right on the ridge of the hood, at about 1 minute and 21 seconds without moving the pad, you can see it's burned through both sides here and a little bit here. That's just going through the clear. We haven't gone through the paint yet, and this is very warm. So what's happening is this peak is just sticking up, and the pad is putting way more pressure here than everywhere else, and it burned right through. So I'm gonna put the camera back on the tripod, and we'll keep going until we burn through. You hear how it's unsettled as well? Means the pad is overheating. Okay, so now at exactly about 3 minutes or so, we've now broken through the clear, and now we're getting into the color of the paint. And you can see, I don't know if you can notice, but the pad is smoking right now. Do you see the smoke coming off that? This color that you're seeing, that's the pigment coming off as well. So this is indicative that we've broken through the clear at about 3 minutes. I have to blow this pad out and start all over again because it's getting very, very hot. So we're almost through at about 3 minutes. When you're working on a high spot or an edge, the pad itself is only hitting that one spot. So it's putting all the pressure, all the weight, all the heat on that one area, and it burns faster. Unlike this over here where the pad is flat and you're able to dissipate that heat a little bit more, the difference between the two is this took about, I don't know, 2 minutes or so to burn through, and it could be different on different panels, of course, but this is this particular car. On the flat panel, it took up to 5 minutes. So you're putting a lot more pressure on a high peak area. You're gonna burn through that really fast. Okay, now that we're through the clear, let's see how long it takes with lots of downward force on the machine to get through the color coat. After 3 more minutes, you begin to see pad failure and smoke coming from both the pad and the paint surface. Now, this goes without saying, but this is wildly improper use of both the machine and the pad that far exceeds its intended and designed use. The brown ring that you see right here is actually burned wool and the glue that actually holds the wool to the pad. After 10 minutes of the test, we've reduced the mils from 6 to 3, and I had to replace the pad 1 time to keep the test going. Okay, now that we're through the clear, let's see how long it takes with lots of downward force on the machine to get through the color coat. Okay, as you can see here at 14 minutes and 34 seconds, now we've broken through the paint, meaning the color section, and now we're into the primer. So let's see how long it takes us to go through the primer and get to the metal. Oof. We've already toasted one pad and we're getting close to toasting another pad. This takes a lot of work to do damage with a dual action polisher. At about the 22-minute mark, I broke through the primer and into a black surface. Now, I believe this is a super thin layer of rust proofing, or what Toyota refers to as chemical treatment to protect the exposed metal. This is usually what happens when the metal is dunked into one of those big vats before they actually put the primer on. We did it. 25 minutes, 52 seconds. Smoking pad, look at that. I just broke through. The base is black, which I think is something to prevent rust. And now I am through and you can actually see metal. 25 minutes. Woo! To be fair, this is an edge or a high spot, and it's much easier to burn through, and why we need to be extra careful around these areas. Now, as we've shown, it took about 25 minutes of constant downward pressure to burn through this particular high spot and show a 0 on the paint depth gauge. On a non-high spot, meaning a flat area where the pad evenly distributes the heat, it's about 4 to 5 minutes to break through the clear coat, which is most important for a detailer. Okay, just for reference, let's look at 6 mils of paint from the side angle. Now, as detailers, we're really focused on the top, but this is how it works. You have the body, in this case, it's metal. There's usually some sort of rust proofing, primer, color. Then on top of that, like the one downstairs, is clear. Our goal is to keep as much clear coat on the car as possible. Clear coat you can think of as like, lack of a better word, suntan lotion, sort of protecting the car from the UV rays. You want to leave as much of that as possible. So it only took a few minutes to go down 2 mils out of the 6 mils and remove the clear coat. This is the danger area for detailers. For panel number 3, I used a foam pad and foam polish and spent about 10 minutes of heavy downward pressure in one spot on the paint and barely removed 0.2, maybe 0.3 mil as I suspected. So it's likely you're gonna destroy more pads before you can remove enough paint to completely burn through the clear. Now my estimate is about 3 to 4 times longer than compound, so maybe 15 to 20 minutes before you might see some damage on this particular car. So in other words, you'd have to work really hard to damage the paint with polish. For my next test, I'm using a rotary polisher to help us gauge how much faster a direct drive machine can cut through the paint versus a dual action random orbit machine. To do this, I'm using a specific wool rotary pad and coarse compound designed for rotary machines, not the previous compound and polish I used for the DA machines in the last test. After measuring this section of the hood, the average paint depth is slightly higher at about 7 mils. It's a rotary. Got a rotary wool pad. Center it. We're gonna go to speed 3, you can see right there. Rotary compound on there. Here we go. After 1 minute and 45 seconds at speed 3 with heavy downward pressure, we pop through the clear roughly twice as fast as a dual action polisher. The paint now has been lowered from 7 mils to 5 mils, again confirming our guess of approximately 2 mils of clear coat. Okay, at 3 minutes and 41 seconds, we've gotten down to the base. We have a little bit more to go to get to the metal, but man, that is fast. And this thing is smoking like crazy, look at that. At 7 minutes and 24 seconds, I burned all the way through the metal in about 1/3 the time it took the DA machine to do it. Boom. Nothing there, 0. For my final test, I repeated the DA wool pad versus the rotary wool pad, but this time on plastic instead of metal, which can't be measured by my paint depth gauge, so we'll just have to focus on the time to burn. At about 48 seconds, the DA burned through the plastic bumper edge. Remember, this is an edge, not a flat part. What about the rotary though? After 15 seconds or so of downward pressure on the edge with the rotary, a large chunk of paint came off because of that twisting action and the heat that's generated. It also confirmed that it took about 1/3 the time to do that versus the dual action polisher. Okay, after all of our tests, what did we learn that we can then use when polishing our paint? The first thing is heat dissipation. In test panel number 1, I moved my arms back and forth as I normally would. What's happening is I'm dissipating the heat around that panel. In test panel number 2, I kept it stationary, so all of that heat was driven down into one central area. What happens is when you heat that up, the byproduct is you are heating up the liquid, in this case the compound, that gets very, very hot and then boom, it evaporates. It's sort of like running an engine without any oil. You have friction, and then again, the byproduct is heat. So when we're polishing our paint, we have to think about how much heat am I introducing to the panel, and is that too much heat, because that can cause a lot of damage. Now, the second thing that became very evident with this test is edge work and how sensitive edges are compared to flat paint. So for instance, in number 2 over here, what we did was we took a flat panel and we put a flat pad on top of it. And as we were going back and forth and generating heat, it took about 4 or 5 minutes to blow through the clear. Totally makes sense. But if we take that and pretend my knuckles are a ridge, and then we put a flat pad on top of it, all of the weight, all of the power is going on that one knuckle, that one ridge. It generates heat really, really fast and burns it almost 2/3 faster than it would on a flat panel. So what that means to us is if you get anywhere near edges, you have to be incredibly conscious about how much heat and how much pressure and power you're putting on that edge, because you're going to burn through it way faster. Now, the third thing that we learned that became really evident is the difference between metal and plastic with respect to the time that you have to polish it safely. Right off the bat, if I were to heat this side up of the metal, likely I'm gonna feel it here because of the transfer of heat. If I did the same thing on plastic, it's likely you're not gonna feel that because it doesn't transfer the heat. As a detailer, what that means to us is we have, I don't know, a couple of minutes to polish this before it starts to burn. Why? Because it's spreading the heat, i.e. spreading the risk around. When you're doing that on a bumper, you have 1/3 the amount of time, and we've proven that because the bumper, the plastic isn't spreading the risk around, isn't spreading the heat around. So in your mind, you're saying, hey, I have to worry about the edges, how much pressure, how much heat. Same thing, even worse on bumpers because you have nowhere to go. It doesn't spread the risk around. So you're gonna have to be very cautious when you're working on bumpers, and I think we proved that here. So the bottom line is this: dual action polishers are gonna give you about 70, 80, maybe even 90% of the cutting power of a rotary, but with the safety of a dual action polisher. So it's incredibly encouraging as a professional detailer to try to pull in as many people to sort of join us in our crazy psychosis of cleaning all these cars and having the joy of protecting and cleaning and polishing our cars. You can actually do that. Now, I shot a video with Kevin Brown out in Los Angeles right here. Make sure you check it out. It is really gonna drive home how you polish a car and avoid burn through. This is Mike Musto's Porsche 996, and when he got it, there was burn through on it, and we interviewed Kevin Brown about how that happens and how to avoid that in the future. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.